The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people looked up at the night sky and wondered if they were alone. They built rockets, sent probes into the darkness, and dreamed of the day when they would finally meet other intelligent beings. What they never expected was that the galaxy had been watching them all along, and that the galaxy was terrified of what it saw. The Galactic Confederation was an alliance of over 200 species spread across thousands of star systems. They had achieved peace, built wonders, and created a civilization that spanned the cosmos. Their scientists had cataloged millions of worlds, and among those worlds, Earth held a special classification. It was labeled as a Category 9 Death World, the highest and most dangerous rating possible. To the aliens of the Confederation, Earth was a nightmare made real. Its gravity was crushing, nearly 3 times stronger than what most species could comfortably survive. Its atmosphere was filled with oxygen, a highly reactive gas that most galactic life forms considered toxic. The planet experienced wild temperature swings, from frozen wastelands to boiling deserts. Massive storms ravaged its surface. Earthquakes split the ground. Volcanoes spewed fire into the sky. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, there were predators. The Confederation had watched Earth for centuries. They observed as a species of soft, hairless primates somehow clawed their way to dominance on this impossible world. They watched humans hunt creatures 10 times their size. They watched humans survive diseases that would wipe out entire Confederation worlds. They watched humans wage wars against each other with weapons of terrifying power, and then rebuild from the ashes. The Confederation scientists wrote lengthy reports about Earth and came to a simple conclusion: stay away. Whatever lived on that death world was too dangerous to contact. But desperation changes everything. The Volcari Dominion had appeared from the far reaches of unexplored space like a plague. They were conquerors, bioengineered over millennia for one purpose: war. Their fleets swept through Confederation territory with brutal efficiency. World after world fell. Billions died. The peaceful species of the Confederation had no answer for such violence. They had forgotten how to fight, if they had ever truly known. Ambassador Catherine of the Althean Council watched the war reports with growing horror. Her people were gentle beings, tall and thin with translucent skin that glowed softly in the light. They were philosophers, artists, and healers. They had never harmed another living creature in their entire history. Now they were being slaughtered. In a small, desperate meeting aboard the Confederation's last mobile command station, Catherine made a proposal that horrified everyone present. She suggested they contact the Deathworlders of Earth. The council erupted in protest. They called her mad. They showed her the files, the images of humans killing and fighting and surviving things that should have killed them. One council member pointed to footage of a human continuing to function after losing a limb, its face twisted in determination rather than despair. Another showed humans voluntarily jumping from aircraft with nothing but fabric to slow their fall. The message was clear. These creatures were insane, dangerous beyond measure. But Catherine stood firm. The Volcari had already conquered 40 star systems. The Confederation fleet was shattered. Their options were extinction or the Deathworlders. She transmitted a distress signal toward Earth and prayed to whatever gods might be listening. Captain Jake Morrison was having a boring day when the signal arrived. He commanded the deep space vessel Endurance, a mining ship working the asteroid fields near Saturn. His crew of 37 had been extracting rare minerals for 6 months, and everyone was tired and ready to go home. The signal changed everything. Jake was a tall man with tired eyes and calloused hands. He had worked in space for 15 years, and he thought he had seen everything. The alien transmission proved him wrong. It was garbled, broken, and filled with desperation. But it contained coordinates leading far beyond the solar system. and it contained a single word that the ship's computer managed to translate. Help. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Amy Reyes, told him to ignore it. Protocol demanded they report the signal to Earth and wait for instructions. Amy was practical, careful, and usually right. But Jake saw something in that transmission that he could not ignore. Someone out there was dying, and they were asking for help. He called a meeting in the ship's small common area. His crew gathered around him, their faces showing confusion and curiosity. Jake played the transmission for them, then explained what he wanted to do. He wanted to follow the coordinates. He wanted to find out who had sent the signal. He knew it was dangerous, possibly suicidal. He asked for volunteers. Every single crew member raised their hand. Marcus Webb, the chief engineer, was the first to speak. He was a heavy-set man with a thick beard and a talent for keeping the Endurance running long past its expected lifespan. He said they did not become astronauts to play it safe. They became astronauts to explore. And besides, he added with a grin, he was curious to meet some aliens. The Endurance was not designed for long-range travel, but Marcus worked his magic. He pushed the engines beyond their limits, jury-rigged the navigation systems, and somehow made the ship do things its designers never intended. After 3 weeks of travel through uncharted space, they found the source of the signal. It was a ship, but barely. The vessel was torn apart, venting atmosphere, drifting dead in the void. Jake ordered a cautious approach. Amy led a small team aboard, wearing their heaviest environmental suits. What they found inside broke their hearts. Ambassador Catherine was dying. Her frail body was crushed under debris that would have been light on her homeworld, but was impossibly heavy here. Her translucent skin flickered weakly. Her large, dark eyes looked up at the humans with an emotion they recognized instantly. Hope. She spoke through a device attached to her throat. Her words translated in the broken English. She told them about the Confederation, about the Valkyrie, about the war that was consuming the galaxy. She begged them for help. Not for herself, she said, but for the billions of innocents who would die if the Valkyrie were not stopped. Jake knelt beside her and took her fragile hand in his rough one. He told her they would help. He did not know how or what they could possibly do against an enemy that had conquered empires. But he knew one thing for certain. Humanity had never been good at ignoring a cry for help. They stabilized Catherine as best they could and set course for Earth. Behind them, the galaxy burned. Ahead of them, humanity waited, unaware that everything was about to change. The Deathworlders were coming, and the universe would never be the same. The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people looked up at the night sky and wondered if they were alone. They built rockets, sent probes into the darkness, and dreamed of the day when they would finally meet other intelligent beings. What they never expected was that the galaxy had been watching them all along, and that the galaxy was terrified of what it saw. The Galactic Confederation was an alliance of over 200 species spread across thousands of star systems. They had achieved peace, built wonders, and created a civilization that spanned the cosmos. Their scientists had cataloged millions of worlds, and among those worlds, Earth held a special classification. It was labeled as a Category 9 Death World, the highest and most dangerous rating possible. To the aliens of the Confederation, Earth was a nightmare made real. Its gravity was crushing, nearly 3 times stronger than what most species could comfortably survive. Its atmosphere was filled with oxygen, a highly reactive gas that most galactic life forms considered toxic. The planet experienced wild temperature swings, from frozen wastelands to boiling deserts. Massive storms ravaged its surface. Earthquakes split the ground. Volcanoes spewed fire into the sky. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, there were predators. The Confederation had watched Earth for centuries. They observed as a species of soft, hairless primates somehow clawed their way to dominance on this impossible world. They watched humans hunt creatures 10 times their size. They watched humans survive diseases that would wipe out entire Confederation worlds. They watched humans wage wars against each other with weapons of terrifying power, and then rebuild from the ashes. The Confederation scientists wrote lengthy reports about Earth and came to a simple conclusion: stay away. Whatever lived on that death world was too dangerous to contact. But desperation changes everything. The Volcari Dominion had appeared from the far reaches of unexplored space like a plague. They were conquerors, bioengineered over millennia for one purpose: war. Their fleets swept through Confederation territory with brutal efficiency. World after world fell. Billions died. The peaceful species of the Confederation had no answer for such violence. They had forgotten how to fight, if they had ever truly known. Ambassador Catherine of the Althean Council watched the war reports with growing horror. Her people were gentle beings, tall and thin with translucent skin that glowed softly in the light. They were philosophers, artists, and healers. They had never harmed another living creature in their entire history. Now they were being slaughtered. In a small, desperate meeting aboard the Confederation's last mobile command station, Catherine made a proposal that horrified E. The Endurance arrived in Earth orbit on a Tuesday morning. Within minutes, every military satellite in the sky was tracking the ship. Within hours, the entire planet knew that humanity was no longer alone in the universe. The news spread like fire through dry grass. People gathered in the streets, staring up at the sky. Some prayed. Some celebrated. Some panicked. But everyone understood that the world had changed forever. Captain Jake Morrison transmitted everything to Earth Command before they even entered orbit. He sent the alien transmission, the coordinates, the video of the dying ambassador, and her desperate message. By the time the Endurance docked at the orbital station, the United Nations had already called an emergency session. Ambassador Catherine was barely alive. Earth's gravity pressed down on her fragile body like a weight she could not bear. The air itself seemed to poison her, even filtered through her damaged suit. Human doctors worked alongside the ship's medical officer to keep her stable, but they had never treated an alien before. Everything was guesswork. Dr. Nicole Patterson arrived from the Centers for Disease Control within days. She was a xenobiologist, though she had never expected to actually study alien biology. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a mind that never stopped working. When she first saw Catherine, she felt two things at once: wonder and deep sadness. This beautiful, fragile being had traveled across the stars to ask for help, and she was dying before their eyes. Nicole worked around the clock. She studied Catherine's biology, her atmosphere requirements, her nutritional needs. She designed a special containment suit that would let the ambassador survive in Earth's harsh environment. But her most important discovery had nothing to do with treating the alien. It had to do with understanding what humans really were. The Confederation had sent files along with Catherine's distress signal. Nicole spent days reading through them, and what she found left her speechless. According to galactic standards, humans were impossible. Their bone density was 3 times higher than the galactic average. Their reflexes were twice as fast. They could function in temperature ranges that would kill most species in minutes. Their immune system was so aggressive that it scared alien physicians. But the most terrifying thing about humans, according to the files, was their endurance. Humans could keep going long after other species would collapse. They could run for hours without stopping. They could survive injuries that should be instantly fatal. They could push through pain, exhaustion, and fear through sheer force of will. The Confederation had a word for creatures like this. They called them persistence predators. Nicole brought her findings to the United Nations Assembly. She stood before the gathered leaders of Earth and explained what the galaxy thought of humanity. She showed them the files, the classifications, the warnings. Earth was a death world. Humans were monsters. And somewhere out there, an empire of conquerors was destroying everything in its path. The debate that followed was long and bitter. Some leaders argued for isolation. Earth had enough problems without getting involved in an alien war. Others saw opportunity in the stars, resources, and technology beyond imagination. A few simply did not believe any of it, calling the whole thing an elaborate hoax. But then, Catherine spoke. She was carried into the assembly hall in her containment suit, her body barely able to support itself. Her voice came through the translator, weak and broken, but her words carried the weight of billions of souls. She told them about her people, the Altheans. She told them about the artists and the dreamers, the children who had never known violence. She told them how the Valkyrie had come without warning, how they had burned cities and slaughtered innocents, how they had laughed while doing it. She showed them footage. The assembly watched in silence as Valkyrie soldiers marched through burning streets. They saw families torn apart. They saw children crying for parents who would never come. They saw the face of evil, cold and calculating, destroying everything beautiful in its path. When the footage ended, Catherine looked at the gathered humans with her large, dark eyes. She said she knew that Earth was far away, that this war was not humanity's problem. But she had seen something in humans that gave her hope. She had seen them risk their lives to save a stranger from a species they had never met. She had seen them show kindness to a dying alien when they could have easily left her to die. She believed that creatures capable of such compassion were also capable of being the galaxy's salvation. The vote was not unanimous, but it did not need to be. Enough nations agreed. Enough people stood up and said that they could not stand by while innocents died. They could not ignore a cry for help simply because it came from far away. Commander Ryan Torres was appointed to lead the first expeditionary fleet. He was a veteran of 3 conflicts on Earth, a man who had seen the worst of humanity and still believed in the best. He was given 12 ships, hastily retrofitted with the best weapons and technology Earth could provide. He was given 10,000 volunteers, men and women who knew they might never see home again. Among them was Jake Morrison, promoted to commander and given his own vessel in the fleet. Amy Reyes stood beside him, her practical nature now focused on survival rather than caution. Marcus Webb refused to leave the Endurance, saying someone had to keep the old girl running. Nicole Patterson joined as the fleet's chief medical officer, determined to learn everything she could about the galaxy they were entering. On the day of departure, millions gathered to watch. The 12 ships rose from Earth's surface and climbed into the sky, their engines burning bright against the blue. People cheered and cried and waved flags. They did not know if they would ever see those ships again, but they knew that humanity was finally reaching out to the stars, not as explorers, but as protectors. Catherine watched from her hospital bed, tears streaming down her translucent face. She had come to Earth hoping for help, but she had found something more. She had found a species that refused to let evil win, no matter the cost. She had found the Deathworlders, and they were everything she had hoped for and more. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving Earth behind. Ahead of them lay the unknown. Ahead of them lay war. But for the first time in months, the galaxy had reason to hope. The Deathworlders were coming to help, and nothing would ever be the same. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace into chaos. Keth Mara Station hung in the darkness ahead, a massive structure that had once been home to 2 million beings from a dozen different species. Now it was burning. Valkyrie warships surrounded it like wolves circling wounded prey. Laser fire streaked through space. Explosions blossomed in silence. And everywhere, desperate civilian ships tried to flee, only to be shot down by Valkyrie fighters. Commander Ryan Torres stood on the bridge of his flagship, the horizon, and felt cold rage settle in his chest. He had seen war before. He had seen cruelty before. But watching helpless civilians being slaughtered while they ran for their lives woke something primal in him. He looked at his crew, saw the same anger in their eyes, and gave an order that would become legendary across the galaxy. Attack immediately. All ships. No hesitation. The 12 human vessels charged into battle without waiting, without planning, without fear. The Valkyrie commanders watched their sensors with confusion. No species attacked them. Everyone ran. Everyone surrendered. These strange ships from an unknown world were doing something impossible. The first Valkyrie cruiser died before its crew understood what was happening. Human missiles, designed to punch through asteroid rock, tore through alien armor like paper. Human pilots flew their fighters in ways that defied reason, pulling turns so sharp that the G-forces should have killed them instantly. But humans had evolved on a heavy world. Their bodies were built to survive forces that would crush other species into paste. Lieutenant Kate Sullivan led a squadron of fighters against a group of Valkyrie bombers heading for the refugee ships. She was a small woman with red hair and a fierce smile, and she had been flying since she was 16 years old. Earth's gravity was nothing compared to what she pulled in that cockpit. She pushed her fighter to its limits and beyond, screaming through maneuvers that made her vision go gray at the edges. A Valkyrie missile found her ship. Half her cockpit was ripped away, exposing her to the vacuum of space. Any other species would have died instantly. Kate held her breath. She remembered her training, remembered that humans could survive in vacuum for almost 2 minutes if they stayed calm. She was not calm. She was furious. But she kept flying anyway. Her targeting computer was destroyed, so she aimed by eye. Her flight suit was torn, so she felt the cold of space seeping into her bones. But she refused to die. She refused to let those bombers reach the civilian ships. She lined up her shot and fired. The lead bomber exploded. Then the second. Then the third. Kate destroyed 5 enemy ships in 90 seconds while holding her breath in hard vacuum. When she finally pulled back to dock with the horizon, her lips were blue and ice crystals had formed on her skin. The medics said she should be dead. She told them she was too angry to die. Meanwhile, Marine Sergeant Chris Dalton was leading a boarding party onto a captured Valkyrie cruiser. The enemy had taken prisoners from the station, and the human fleet was not going to leave them behind. Chris was a big man with gentle eyes and hands that could crush metal. He had joined the Marines to protect people, and today he was going to do exactly that. The Valkyrie were tall creatures, covered in natural armor and sharp spines. They were bred for combat, stronger and faster than most galactic species. They had never lost a ground battle in their entire history. They had never faced humans. Chris and his team cut through the cruiser like a storm. The Valkyrie fought back with everything they had, but nothing they did seemed to work. They shot the humans, and the humans kept coming. They stabbed the humans, and the humans kept coming. One Marine took a blade through his shoulder and simply snapped the blade off, then kept fighting with the broken metal still embedded in his flesh. The Valkyrie soldiers started to panic. Their training had not prepared them for enemies who did not stop. Their instincts screamed at them to run from these monsters who felt pain but ignored it, who bled but refused to fall. For the first time in their conquest of the galaxy, the Valkyrie knew fear. Chris found the prisoners in the lower decks. Hundreds of aliens from the station, mostly Elthians and other peaceful species, huddled in cells. They screamed when they saw him, convinced that another monster had come to hurt them. But then they saw him break the locks with his bare hands. They saw him pick up an injured Althian child with gentleness that seemed impossible for a creature so strong. They heard him speak soft words of comfort in a language they did not understand but somehow felt. The prisoners followed the humans back to the shuttle. Along the way, they saw things they would never forget. They saw humans shielding alien bodies with their own. They saw humans taking wounds meant for others. They saw a species that fought like demons, but protected like angels. The battle lasted 4 hours. When it ended, the Valkyrie fleet was destroyed. Every single enemy ship was either blown apart or captured. The human fleet had lost 2 ships, hundreds of crew members, and countless fighters. But Kethmara Station was saved. The refugees survived. And across the galaxy, word began to spread. The Confederation forces who had been defending the station stared at their saviors with something between awe and terror. They had read the files about Earth. They had seen the warnings about the Deathworlders. But nothing had prepared them for the reality. These humans had done in 4 hours what the entire Confederation military had failed to do in 6 months of fighting. Commander Torres stood on the station's observation deck after the battle, looking out at the wreckage floating in space. He was tired. He was wounded. He had lost good people today. But he had also saved millions of lives. And that was worth any price. An Althean elder approached him slowly, still afraid of the human despite everything. The elder asked a question that Torres would hear many times in the coming months. She asked how humans could be so deadly and yet so willing to sacrifice themselves for strangers. Torres thought about the question for a long moment. Then he gave the only answer that made sense to him. He said that humans knew what it was like to be afraid. They knew what it was like to be hunted, to be helpless, to watch loved ones die. That was why they fought so hard to protect others. Because they remembered what it felt like to need protection themselves. The elder nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but accepting. She welcomed humanity to the galactic stage. She did not know that this was only the beginning. The real war had not yet begun. News of the Battle of Kethmara spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Every species, every world, every outpost heard the same incredible story. A fleet of strange creatures from a death world had appeared from nowhere and destroyed a Valkyrie attack force in hours. The invincible conquerors had been beaten. Hope was alive again. Commander Ryan Torres established humanity's forward base on Kethmara Station. The damaged sections were sealed off, and what remained became the headquarters for the growing human presence in the galaxy. Ships from Earth arrived weekly, bringing supplies, weapons, and most importantly, volunteers. Thousands of men and women left everything behind to fight in a war that was not theirs. For people they had never met. Among the new arrivals was Dr. Nathan Cole, a combat medic with 20 years of experience in Earth's worst conflict zones. He was a quiet man with steady hands and eyes that had seen too much death. He came to the station expecting to treat wounded humans. What he found instead changed his understanding of medicine forever. The Confederation species were fragile in ways Nathan could not have imagined. Their bones broke from falls that a human child would laugh off. Their organs failed from stress levels that humans experienced every day. Their immune systems were so weak that a common earth cold could kill them in hours. Nathan realized that to most galactic species, humans were not just tough. They were practically immortal. He set up a medical bay on the station and began treating anyone who needed help. Word spread quickly about the human doctor who could work miracles. Aliens came to him with injuries that their own physicians had given up on. Nathan saved them with techniques that seemed like magic but were just standard. Earth medicine applied to bodies that had never evolved to handle real hardship. One day, a Confederation physician named Vartek asked to observe Nathan treating a wounded human Marine. The Marine had taken shrapnel to the chest and needed emergency surgery. Nathan agreed, thinking nothing of it. What happened next became a legend throughout the Confederation medical community. Nathan performed the surgery without anesthesia. The Marine was awake the entire time, gritting his teeth and making occasional jokes about the quality of the station's food. Vartek watched in horror as Nathan cut into living flesh while the patient simply endured. When it was over, Vartek asked how such a thing was possible. Nathan explained that humans had evolved the ability to push through pain when necessary. It was how their ancestors had survived. Vartek spent the next hour in his quarters, trying to process what he had witnessed. He eventually wrote a report that was read by every physician in the Confederation. The report had a simple conclusion. Humans were not like other species. They were something else entirely. Something that had no right to exist, yet existed anyway. Corporal Megan Harris became famous in a different way. She was assigned to protect a group of Althean refugees while they were being evacuated to a safer world. The transport was ambushed by Volcari raiders who had slipped through the defensive lines. When the enemy boarded the ship, Megan was the only soldier on board. She held a corridor for 3 hours. The Volcari sent wave after wave of soldiers against her, and she killed them all. She was shot 6 times. She was stabbed 4 times. A grenade exploded near her and filled her body with shrapnel. But she would not fall. She could not fall. Behind her were 200 civilians, including children, and she had promised to protect them. When reinforcements finally arrived, they found Megan still standing, her weapon empty, her body covered in blood, both hers and alien. The corridor was filled with Volcari bodies. She had killed 37 enemy soldiers by herself. The medics counted 17 separate wounds on her body. She should have died at least 5 times over. She survived. The Altheans called her the Undying One, and they built shrines in her honor. Megan felt uncomfortable with the attention. She said she had just been doing her job. But the story that truly changed the war involved a young soldier named Ben Castillo. He was only 19 years old, barely out of training, assigned to guard duty at the Confederation High Council chambers. It was supposed to be a safe assignment, a way for a new recruit to get experience without facing real danger. Ben did not expect to become a legend. The Volcari had sent an assassination squad to kill the council members. If they succeeded, the Confederation would collapse into chaos, and the war would be lost. The assassins were elite soldiers, the best the Volcari had, trained specifically to kill important targets. They bypassed every security system and eliminated every guard in their path. Ben was the last one standing between them and the council doors. His rifle jammed after killing 2 of them. He was alone, unarmed except for his combat knife, facing 6 of the most dangerous soldiers in the galaxy. He attacked anyway. The fight lasted less than 2 minutes. Ben moved with a speed and ferocity that the Volcari had never encountered. He dodged their attacks by inches, reading their movements with predator instincts honed by millions of years of evolution. His knife found gaps in their armor that they did not know existed. He took wounds that should have stopped him and kept fighting. When reinforcements arrived, they found Ben standing over 6 dead Volcari, breathing hard, his knife dripping with alien blood. He had cuts and bruises covering his body, but nothing serious. When Commander Torres asked him how he had managed to kill 6 elite assassins with only a knife, Ben shrugged and said they were slower than he expected. The Volcari High Command received the battle reports with growing terror. Their intelligence on humans had been catastrophically wrong. They had expected primitives. They had expected easy prey. Instead, they had awakened something ancient and terrible. Creatures forged in the fires of a world that should have killed them. Predators who had clawed their way to the top of the most dangerous planet in the known galaxy. For the first time in their history, the Volcari began to doubt. Their soldiers whispered about the Deathworlders in fearful tones. They spoke of humans who could not be killed, who felt no pain, who fought with the fury of cornered animals. They spoke of monsters from the darkest legends. The tide of war was turning, and the humans were just getting started. The final assault on the Valkyrie homeworld began on a day that would be remembered for 10,000 years. Commander Ryan Torres stood on the bridge of the horizon, looking at the tactical display that showed the combined fleet arrayed before him. 200 ships, the largest armada ever assembled in galactic history. Half of them were human. The other half were Confederation vessels crewed by species who had learned how to fight from their Deathworlder allies. The humans had changed everything. In 2 years of warfare, they had pushed the Valkyrie back from 40 conquered systems. They had freed billions of captives. They had taught the peaceful species of the Confederation that strength did not require cruelty, that warriors could also be protectors. The galaxy was no longer helpless, and the Valkyrie knew it. The enemy homeworld was called Valkar Prime, a beautiful garden planet with gentle weather and low gravity. It was everything Earth was not. Looking at it, Torres understood why the Valkyrie had become what they were. They had never faced true hardship. They had never been tested by their environment. They had grown strong through conquest because the world had never forced them to be strong through survival. The Valkyrie had fortified their planet with everything they had left. Orbital platforms bristled with weapons. Ground defenses covered every approach. Their remaining fleet, still numbering in the hundreds, stood ready to fight to the last ship. They expected the Deathworlders to show no mercy. They expected annihilation. Lieutenant Amy Reyes, now commanding her own cruiser, led the first wave of the assault. She had changed since leaving Earth 3 years ago. The practical woman who had urged caution was gone. In her place was a battle-hardened commander who had seen the worst the galaxy had to offer and refused to let it win. Her ship punched through the orbital defenses like a battering ram, clearing a path for the invasion force. The space battle was brutal. Ships died on both sides. The void filled with debris and bodies and the silent screams of the dying. But the humans and their allies were relentless. They had learned to fight together, to combine human ferocity with Confederation technology. The Valkyrie defenses crumbled one by one. Marcus Webb, the old engineer who had kept the Endurance running through every battle, finally saw his beloved ship die. A Valkyrie missile found the engine room, and Marcus ordered his crew to evacuate while he stayed behind to manually vent the reactor. The explosion took out 2 enemy cruisers. Marcus became a hero. He would have hated that if he had lived to hear about it. The human Marines landed on Valkar Prime in the thousands. They expected fierce resistance. They expected to fight for every inch of ground. What they found instead stopped them in their tracks. Valkyrie civilians huddled in shelters, their young clutched in trembling arms. They were not soldiers. They were not warriors. They were parents and children, scared and helpless, waiting for the monsters from the death world to kill them. They had been told stories about humans for 2 years. Stories of unstoppable demons who knew nothing but violence. They expected to die screaming. Sergeant Chris Dalton, the same man who had led the boarding party at Kethmora Station, was the first to enter a civilian shelter. He saw the terrified faces, the children crying, the adults trying to protect them with their bodies. He remembered another shelter on another world, filled with different aliens who had looked at him with the same fear. He lowered his weapon. He signaled his squad to stand down. Then he did something that would be debated by historians for centuries. He knelt down, making himself small and unthreatening, and he spoke softly to the cowering civilians. He told them, through his translator, that they were safe now, that no one was going to hurt them, that the killing was over. The order spread through the human forces like wildfire. Commander Torres broadcasted on all channels, overriding any confusion. Weapons hold. Protect the non-combatants. This was not a massacre. This was a liberation. The Volcari military commanders watched in disbelief from their bunkers. They had prepared for genocide. They had expected the Deathworlders to do what they themselves would have done: kill everything that moved, burn the cities, salt the earth. Instead, they saw human soldiers sharing rations with starving civilians. They saw human medics treating wounded Volcari alongside their own injured. They saw the most terrifying species in the galaxy acting with gentle compassion. The Volcari Emperor surrendered 2 days later. He was an old creature, ancient by his species standards, who had led his people for 300 years of conquest. He had never lost a war. He had never bowed to anyone. But he walked into the human command post with his head down and his hands empty, and he knelt before Commander Torres. The Emperor asked a question that echoed across the galaxy. He asked how creatures so deadly could be so kind. He did not understand. His entire species did not understand. They had been taught that strength meant cruelty, that power meant domination. The humans proved that everything they believed was wrong. Torres looked at the kneeling Emperor for a long moment. He thought about all the people who had died in this war, human and alien alike. He thought about Marcus Webb and his last sacrifice. He thought about the scared children in those shelters. Then he gave an answer that would be carved into monuments on 100 worlds. He said that humans knew what it was like to suffer. They came from a world that tried to kill them every day. They had survived plagues and disasters and wars without number. They had seen their own children die. They had felt hopelessness and despair. But they had also learned something important. They had learned that the only way to survive true darkness was to light a fire for others. They had not made it this far by being cruel. They had made it by protecting each other. The war ended not with genocide, but with mercy. The Volcari Dominion was dissolved, its conquered territories freed, its people given the chance to rebuild. Human administrators worked alongside Confederation peacekeepers to help former enemies become future friends. It was not easy. It would take generations. But it was possible because the Deathworlders had shown that another way existed. The Galactic Confederation officially welcomed humanity as full members on the anniversary of the Battle of Kethmara. Ambassador Catherine, fully recovered and stronger than she had ever been, stood before the assembly and spoke of the day she had called for help. She had prayed for warriors. She had received protectors instead. Across 1,000 worlds, the story was told. The story of the Deathworlders who came from a nightmare planet. The story of creatures who could survive anything, who felt pain but conquered it, who faced death with grim smiles and refused to surrender. The story of humans. The aliens had expected monsters. They had expected killers. They had expected the worst that the galaxy could offer. They found heroes instead, and that was what left them standing in shock. Not the strength, not the ferocity, not the impossible toughness. It was the kindness. It was the compassion. It was the discovery that the most dangerous species in the known universe was also the most willing to sacrifice everything for strangers. The galaxy had been rescued by Deathworlders. And the Deathworlders, against all expectations, had proven that the heart mattered more than the fist. Humanity had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same again.